Welcome to Interfaithing, a podcast for and about Jewish and Christian interfaith families,
where we explore the question why families can embrace two faiths under one roof.
I'm Ari, the son of a rabbi
with a degree from the Jewish Theological Seminary.
I'm Anna, the daughter of a minister with a degree from the Union Theological Seminary. We were co-teachers together at the interfaith community in New York.
And 1 year of working together led to 15 years of friendship and collaboration.
To find us sitting here today, embarking on a new project.
Whether you are part of an interfaith family,
or you're exploring and interested in how different faiths interact with one another,
this is the space for you.
Subscribe to guarantee you never miss an episode.
And help us spread the Torah and gospel of interfaith wisdom far and wide.
And you'll also gain access to exclusive content like our holiday live stream events.
We hope you enjoy every episode.
Listen at your own pace.
Share with a friend.
And don't forget to subscribe.
This episode, we are unpacking the myth of you just don't care. You married somebody of a different faith tradition because you just don't care about your own. For a full introduction to this episode, please check out part 1. And now, let's get to part 3. All right, Anna, final story of our first season. Do you realize that?
Final story of the first season. I do want to take a moment because that feels important. And I at least want to congratulate ourselves for all the work. And
you can hear I'm doing a golf clap over here.
The golf clap, yes. And forever and always, thank you to all of our guests, the folks who went along this journey with us to provide their voices and, bring themselves into this. We hope that we've represented you well.
This should not be our last season. Please, everyone, like us so that this will not be our last season. So the story is from Kate. If you've just joined us, we were introduced to Kate DeAngelis of the Interfaith Book Group in New York during the second part of myth number 1. Judaism and Christianity do not mix. They're too different. And Kate is going to share a story about her aunt. I said aunt. She says aunt. Everyone says it differently. In particular, thinking about the notion of an interfaith family where you have different levels of connection to faith. Meaning you have someone who is more connected than their spouse. And the challenge is not being necessarily on the same page of what faith is supposed to look like for yourselves and also for your family. Now, what's also interesting about the story that you're going to hear is that the aunt comes from an interfaith family in the sense of a Catholic with another Christian. So she's Catholic and he does not identify as Catholic, but as Christian. And we talked before about the notion of the interdenominational differences and how there are similarities to interdenominational differences and interfaith differences. So you're going to hear a little bit about that, and in particular about the aunt's challenge of bringing religion into her home, her family, when her partner is not as interested.
Yeah, please, let's go.
Okay.
One of the other things, a little story I had, where being told that this is going to be hard. I remember my aunt, when Josh and I first started dating, saying, is this serious? She's my godmother and she's very involved in the church. And she herself is part of a interfaith marriage. Her husband is still Christian, but not Catholic, and he does not observe or participate in any way. And so growing up, she would take the kids, her 2 boys, my cousins, to church by herself. And she was telling me the story about how one day they were just being so rotten in church. She just grabbed them, ran out, sat on the steps out front and just cried. And she was saying, it can be really challenging to do that on your own. And so that is, I'm not going to lie, still a fear that I have one day, but I think that our communication and our growth And this community is so supportive that we'll never really be alone. And that is so reassuring to think about.
That's a relatively quick story, just about a minute long or so. And I have some thoughts on it, but I think it kind of explains itself, especially given the topic of apathy that we're really focusing on with this myth. So, Anna, do you have a hot take on it?
It is short, but we've also had some pretty short, sweet, and straight to the point stories that still are chock full of really important points. For Kate to know this about her family member and share that one of her fears, insecurities about engaging in an interfaith relationship is that, well, if that was already so hard for my aunt, and it's it's only, air quotes, only in the interdenominational sense, like how much harder is this going to be? And obviously, I think she's speaking from a place of, well, we're already moving forward with our relationship, right? Like we're doing this.
Right.
And the fact that she underscores having a community around her and Josh,
right,
making such a difference, because it just is making me reflect on the number of mixed Christian households that I'm aware of, where it, again, that interdenominational, whether it's Catholic and other, or Baptist and Methodist, or maybe someone whose extended family identified as Christian, but that person really does not, like agnostic or atheist might be a better label, with a partner who is still observant of their own Christianity.
Right.
And I might be totally ignorant of them, but I don't know of support groups for a lot of folks in those types of relationships and families. And so it is just very striking to me that between the book club, who we're hearing from, and then people from other organizations that we've also heard from in our stories, whether it's the IFFP, we've mentioned the Chicago School, the IFC in New York, etc., that community plays such an important part.
Yeah.
As a solvent, if you will, to what a lot of these challenges and barriers, like instead of, having these like rough intention, how am I going to sort through this? And you and your partner feel like you're alone in having to make these choices and decisions for your life, that you have a community to be a balm.
Right. To be able to help you out.
Exactly. Whatever the decision winds up being. Because again, we've talked about it like so many times, and it bears repeating. Each couple is going to make a decision that feels right and is best for them.
Right.
And so thinking about it with our myth of, if you do this, it means you don't take your faith seriously at all. One or both of you are just utterly apathetic. Kate was worried about that. But I think even in the example of her aunt, it was to say, here was somebody who, even though it was hard, still committed to living out her faith in a way that was important to her. And yes, that created a worry and a fear within Kate as well. And yet, because her partner was expressing something different than her uncle, I also got the sense that that was a big source of relief as well. That even though, again, like the faith traditions and each person's respective observance would be unique, not the same, they were at least aligned in caring about their respective traditions.
And also in supporting their partner in their faith choices, and in how to bring their faith's partner into the home.
Yeah.
I have heard a number of stories where one of the challenges is not as much about the mixture of the different faith traditions per se. Rather, the challenge is one partner doesn't really support the other partner's journey. And so you have one person who is apathetic, And maybe there is a faith component to that. Maybe it has to do with I don't necessarily feel that comfortable going to church or going to synagogue, or I don't feel that this is mine. If you want to do it, then great, but I'm not going to be a part of it. Because as we said, everyone does it differently. But the fear that you're going to be alone, that you're just going to be the only one dealing with this, that's what I heard in the aunt's real pain when she didn't have her person to be able to help her when the kids were being crazy in church. Now, don't get me wrong. I definitely been on the other side where in synagogue, Rachel has had to deal with the kids going crazy and I'm up on the bima leading a service and I can't necessarily go down to help her. So there are a lot of different reasons why your spouse may not necessarily be available to be able to help out. And so from a parenting point of view, that's a challenge in many different spaces. But I think that the notion that my partner doesn't really support the faith journey that I'm trying to bring my family on, that I think is what's so hard.
Yeah.
Right? When one of the members of the family, especially the co-parent, is apathetic. So that's one thing. And I think that the point you're saying about how community can be that balm is so critical, because the notion of it takes a village to raise a family. It takes a village to be able to help a family engage with faith, engage with raising children. All of that plays into this to the point where, yeah, if your spouse may not necessarily be as into it, there are others who can help you out, whatever it may be. But here's the thing that, and one of the other reasons why I wanted to raise this story, and it has to do with just that larger sense of apathy. From a Jewish point of view, one of the biggest issues, or one of the biggest myths that we've unpacked a little bit here, is the notion that if you marry somebody who's not Jewish, it means that you don't care about your Judaism. And while we've hopefully done a good job of debunking that larger myth, I have met individuals, and one particular couple I'm thinking of, it's an interfaith couple, and I was talking to the husband, who is Jewish, about getting involved in the synagogue. And what he said to me was, yeah, I'm not that interested. I mean, you see who I married, right? So for him, it was like a self-identifying marker of his non-engagement was the fact that he married somebody who wasn't Jewish.
Wow.
So it's not even necessarily that he couldn't find a way. In fact, ironically, it was in the context of an event related to the synagogue where I met him. But the fact that he would identify his non-Jewish wife as the sign that he was apathetic towards his Judaism, that is where that larger myth of you obviously don't care about your faith, that's why you married somebody else, that has some legs to it. And I'll put it another way. Right now, the numbers are 70% of the non-Orthodox Jewish population in America is intermarried. We're putting out this podcast to the wider world in the hopes that people will find it interesting and it will engage them in the journey of making faith a part of their lives. I'm curious to see, and we're thinking about the response to this podcast and imagining, let's say that every interfaith family out there will have a chance to know that there's something out there that they could listen to, even in the privacy of their own home, wherever they may be.
Yeah.
Regarding what it might be like to engage faithfully with the different faith traditions in your household. And what I'm wondering is, out of that 70%, will the vast majority actually pick up and listen? Will they care enough to try? Because that's where the rubber hits the road here.
Yeah.
Ultimately, making the decision to engage, to do that work. We know that there are many families out there for sure, but are there enough to really make this a larger movement?
Yeah. I have to admit, the question that I've been sitting with really throughout the entire time that we've been recording, from my end of our conversations as someone from a Christian tradition, Christian background, however I might claim that label and an identifier for myself, I don't think I've said it enough in these episodes that writ large, Christians are far less concerned with this topic because, especially in the United States, the predominance of assumptive Christian relationships is still very true. The closest I think I've come to saying that out loud is highlighting interdenominational marriages within Christianity. You know, Catholic communities in different parts of the country are either very, very small or non-existent. And so again, how you hold on to, let's say, your family background of Catholicism might mean that you have to keep that within yourself. And there aren't that many other Catholic partners to choose from.
Right.
Depending on where you live. Therefore, yes, you still marry somebody else who also says they are Christian. But again, the expression of your faith, what that means, the theological questions, there's a lot of differences that come with that. And yet, you're all still under the umbrella term Christian. And I think even what it means to claim that as an identity in the United States, depending on where you are, it's either very important or it's not. If you're within an evangelical community or somebody who otherwise feels and believes very strongly in the notion that Christianity is under attack because secularism is run amok, then being a Christian is very important. And there's also very strict definitions of what that means. And a lot of people are wrong and you are right. There's a right way to be Christian and a wrong way to be Christian.
Right.
And then there's also a lot of other folks who come from a family tradition where, yes, like all of their extended family members would have said that they were Christian, but the observance and the seriousness has waned dramatically throughout the generations to the point that either those individuals do not attend church at all and yet still say, oh, well, yeah, you know, like I'm Christian because my parents and grandparents XYZ, or they only very occasionally attend services, but still use the identifier of like, well, yeah, I'm a Christian or I'm from a Christian background. And I think that that difference about what it means for Jews to have this conversation around intermarriage and like a lot of Christians even considering the topic of interfaith marriages are very different. And I don't want us to end season 1 without being really explicit and naming that, if only to say, from my perspective, I think the people who are going to care more about our topic have a connection to Judaism. Not that Christians don't care, but we've already expressed like Jewish identity and Jewish continuity are very specific topics that don't have Christian equivalents because we are dominant, at least in the United States. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense because living in a majority culture, one of the ways in which Jews have assimilated to majority cultures in the past is by taking on some of those traditions, as this is what everyone does. And so you had cases, especially in the first half of the 20th century, where Jews took on the tradition of having a Christmas tree, not because of the faith component to it, but because, like I talked about once with the Hanukkah dreidel, it's what everyone else did. And so let's do it. Let's participate with it. So I think the concern about what does it mean to live in as a minority in a majority culture, for sure, that is primarily within, especially in the context we're talking about, the Jewish piece to it. And I would say that there are a couple of analogs to what you just shared that I think there's actually some similarities here in terms of the concerns of what intermarriage, interfaith marriage can feel like, can look like, even for Christians within who are living within a majority culture. So I had raised before an idea that appears in the Talmud about minhag avotehem. This is a phrase used in the Talmud to basically say that folks who identify with a particular faith tradition that is not Jewish and who in previous generations we might consider to be idolaters, but now we realize that, oh, you know, they're not as strict as we thought that they were. They follow some of their traditions, but
Mm.
they're not so adamant about this is the way that you have to believe in. They're not going to force you to do it.
Yeah.
What they're doing is they're following minhag avotehem. They're following the customs of their ancestors, of the previous generations.
Yeah.
And so the notion that you observe the holidays of Easter and Christmas and engage in some of those different traditions related to Christianity as a faith tradition, but you're not doing it because you're connected to the faith. You're doing it because that's what you grew up with. That's what was passed down to you. That is very much that idea, minhag avotehem, the customs of the previous generations, which I would say as well, from a Jewish perspective, that's the notion of tradition. I can tell you how many Jews go to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and don't really think that they're praying to God, but that's what we do. They're doing it because that's the custom. That's what we do.
Right. Or again, from people I know were raised Catholic and attended Mass that was entirely in Latin.
Mm-hmm.
And so all they've ever known, but they don't speak Latin, all they've ever known is the Latin Mass, and they know how to go through the motions and like, oh, okay, after I hear the words that sound kind of like this, I need to stand up, and then we're going to kneel. And then at some point we're going to get in line and we're all going to take the sacrament. But like what is actually being said during the service, you have no idea.
No.
On the one hand, it is about this is the ritual and this is a tradition, and I don't need to know exactly what's happening in order to still feel connected, right? Because I'm here with my grandmother, and so I'm happy to go through the motions and do what she's doing because now it's something that we share together. And for some people, it's also an example of I'm here maybe out of a sense of obligation or just it's a habit and I don't really question why I'm still attending church. And I also am not theologically curious enough to go and find out what is actually happening.
Right. It is the notion of what does it really mean to engage with your faith, with your tradition? Like, what does it mean to take on that label of Jewish, Christian, Catholic, evangelical? So one of my favorite teachings from Torah comes from the end of Moses's last speech, poem to the people of Israel. It's in Parshat Ha'azinu, which is towards the very end of the book of Deuteronomy. I forget the chapter offhand, but it's pretty late. It's only like one more chapter left in the entire Torah. And after he gives this poem to all of Israel, this final teaching, he says that ki lo davar rek hu mikem, ki hu chayechem. He says that this teaching that I'm giving you, this song, this Torah, it is not an empty thing for you. Rather, it is your very life. And one of my favorite comments on that verse to kind of really flesh out that idea is that not only is it that this thing is not empty for you, but that if it seems empty for you, it is now up to you to discover how it does not have to be empty, how it could fill you up because it is your very life. And I think that there's something really deep and powerful there about the notion that in order for faith, in order for tradition to mean something, we have to go and pursue it. Which obviously leads to the question of, well, what if I don't want to? Fair enough. Everyone has their own different ideas about if faith is important. And granted, if you're listening to this right now, faith is probably of interest to you. But I want to assume that somebody listening is someone who has been asking the question, like, is this something I really should care about? I don't think so. I just see religion as leading to all the world's evils. So why should I give it a shot?
Right.
And I think that ultimately the reason why that verse kind of speaks to me is because here is a verse from an ancient manuscript. We don't know the source of it, whether it's from human beings or a divine being, but it is holy and sacred to so many people over the course of centuries. And it is still being read today. And if you read it, you will find so much within it that speaks to the human condition, that speaks to what life is all about, that speaks to ways in which we can continue to make life better. And so when somebody asks me the question, like, why bother? My answer is like, how could I not bother?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And in a similar vein, I don't remember exactly when I was asked this question. It was definitely somebody who was trying to goad me a little bit.
Okay.
Um, I think this person, did kind of self-identify strongly as an atheist, and so was asking me this question that I'm going to share, like from this space of, I think you're wrong, and I'm trying to like kind of catch you in
Mm-hmm.
magical thinking or whatever. And so the question that they asked to me was, well, what if it turned out that some historic evidence was provided that proved Jesus never existed?
Mm. Mm.
And
And what'd you say?
I very easily looked at this person and said, well, to be quite frank with you, I don't actually need Jesus to have existed, because the example and the story and the message that is provided through those scriptures are still meaningful and important.
Yes.
So my faith does not actually hinge on me being able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt something about a divine figure.
Right.
There's an element to that that connects me to what you were just describing about Torah,
Yeah.
because that is what faith is.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, it's very felt and it's very visceral. And on the other hand, it's also ineffable.
Mm.
Instead of it being like an oil and water or two positive poles of a magnet that can't touch, they are in fact intertwined.
Right.
I'm going to bring our tree metaphor, back.
Always
back,
about the trees.
always about the trees. We're talking about two different parts of something that are necessary in order for the tree to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be faith. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter the way that it does. We
Right.
wouldn't have wrestled with these questions for millennia.
Yeah.
If human beings were actually able to just make a conclusion and say, okay, this is settled, we're done with it.
Mm.
The fact that we wrestle with these questions and turn back to those scriptures and have generation upon generation, millions of people considering these things,
Mm-hmm.
tells me that it's something very compelling and important.
And I think that the compelling and important piece to faith is that it is speaking about that which is ineffable, in which we feel connected in some capacity to that which is beyond, but often struggle to find the language that adequately expresses it, which is one reason why much of the prayer in all faith traditions is poetry.
Yeah.
Because poetry speaks to an understanding that language is just our tool for being able to touch something, but not to grasp it, not to fully understand and comprehend, but to recognize and appreciate and be amazed by. The argument that we are making here on the podcast, at least this is my understanding of the argument that we're making, is that interfaith families have an incredible opportunity before them. And by interfaith families, yes, we're talking primarily about Jewish and Christian because of our own backgrounds. But really, in this case, I would want us to extend it to all different kinds of interfaith relationships, interdenominational relationships. At certain points in history, those relationships would lead you to be burned at the stake. Those relationships would force you to have to leave your home, to have to find some backwater place in order to be able to live. Thankfully, we do not necessarily need that right now in our country, which is one of the great values of what America affords the world as a home for that kind of religious freedom. And so here we have an opportunity where if you are in an interfaith relationship, you have an opportunity to be able to live together with someone and a whole family who have a connection to a different tradition, which is as well one of the central ways in which human beings have been able to connect to that which is greater, to that which is bigger, to help understand the world around them. You have a chance to learn more about that tradition in a real way. And that family has a chance to learn from you about your own tradition because they've probably never had that kind of experience before.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have an incredible chance to make the world better and more peaceful and more understanding, because even if you take this idea that religion is at the heart of all that is wrong, even more so, do you have a requirement, I would say, an obligation to be able to at least engage in that kind of work to help build peace among two different faith traditions just within your own home.
Yes.
And then on the larger level, to be able to raise up this example of how faith traditions can be able to not just learn to live with each other, but to love each other and together be able to connect on that larger scale.
Indeed. Indeed. So again, underscoring our perspective that apathy is not at work,
No,
because mere tolerance, as you were just describing, Ari, is not the same thing as loving out loud. Again, this is more, I would even say, than coexistence, because they are married.
right.
They are not simply standing side by side and allowing one another to be.
No,
They
they're in
are
union.
in union, intertwined, supporting one another in order to build a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. It's really amazing if folks are willing to go through it, willing to do it. And I think that the story that we heard from Kate's aunt, the story, the little mini story I shared about that Jewish individual who said, yeah, I'm not that interested. You see who I married, is to say that there is a bit of an uphill battle for families who are in that position of being in an interfaith relationship to see the possibility of what it could be. But we have more of an ability to do that now than we ever have before.
Yes.
And so I hope that as we move forward, that we're going to be able to continue to press on this idea that apathy is not at work. And especially that interfaith families are interested, engaged, and want to be able to be part of this incredible opportunity that's at their fingertips.
Yeah. So
All
much
right.
is unfolding.
So much. All right. Well, is there like something new on the horizon for us here on this podcast, given the fact that we're coming to the end of season 1?
Oh, Lord, but like we just gave birth to this thing. Oh man.
So I guess the answer is yes, there is a hereafter of this season, because we're going to be more.
I mean, Ari, this is the digital age, right? The internet is forever. So our podcast episodes, now that they exist online, will never end.
Oh, they will never end, that's for sure.
They will never end. They will always be there.
And I should say, and I think that for what we're trying to do,
yes,
we are looking towards the future, towards not the end of this life, but the next stage of life for this podcast in different ways.
Indeed. And we have a lot of ideas. We hope that all of you who have listened along with us share in our enthusiasm and wanting to see what's going to come next. There will be a season 2.
Woohoo! Season 2.
And, maybe you'll have to stay connected with us on our socials, on the website, via our Patreon. However, in order to find out what that second season will be focused on, because we're going to be soliciting new stories.
Yes, we will be.
Maybe
if you want to hear your story.
Yeah. Maybe you've got a good one. Maybe
it'll be something a little bit different. You never know.
Yeah.
But what we will also say is that we're going to have more to share about how we're viewing this next stage of life for us on this podcast of interfaithing in our epilogue to season 1.
Yes.
It'll be a whole episode devoted to kind of recapping and gearing us up for what this next stage is going to look like. So we're very much looking forward to sharing some of those ideas with you.
Yes. So it's incredible to be closing out this first season and having unpacked all of these myths in multiple parts. And as Ari was saying, we gave you a prologue, we provided our origin stories, we set the tone and let you know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to give you an epilogue as well. And very likely an ellipses at the end saying coming soon, ...
Mm-hmm.
Not a cliffhanger, but a coming soon.
Coming soon. And I think this goes without saying. I think you hear it in my voice, and I think you hear it in Anna's, that Anna, this has been so much fun spending time with you, doing this work. I could sit here and talk shop with you all day long, but I think that's kind of how this thing got started. We're like, do you think people might be interested in hearing us?
I know. 15 years in the making.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But it has been awesome and can't wait for the future ahead. And with that, we will sign ourselves off. Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to part 3 of episode 6, You Just Don't Care.
We hope you learned and laughed with us.
Subscribe to guarantee you never miss an episode.
And we want to thank our supporters and contributors, our families, and all of our featured storytellers.
We also want to give a special shout out to our composer and music producer, Pablo Langang.
Subscribe, share, leave a review, and send us a message. We would love to hear your feedback and to learn more of your stories.
Find us on any of your podcast platforms to subscribe, and you can also find us on interfaithingpod.com.
Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
And if you really like what you hear, please consider supporting us financially at patreon.com/interfaithing.
So until we meet again, take care.
Stay curious.
And
Keep
keep interfaithing.